David, thank you very much. And we have a treat today. James or Jim Donahue will be presenting to us about the Coast Guard. And many of us don't know very much about the Coast Guard. We do know, if we've seen Hamilton, that he founded the Coast Guard early in his career. And that's pretty much maybe all we know, except for seeing maybe crisp, well-groomed Coast Guarders in films or in the news, but we don't know anything about the history or really the scope of the Coast Guard. So Jim is a 30-year career Coast Guard person, and he retired as captain in 1994. Again, he was a civil engineer, and then he, after that, worked for 8 years here in Alexandria in the Association for the Society of American Military Engineering. He then started his own company, and then he is currently a registered professional engineer in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He's also one of us. He resided in Arlington for a long time and took many Encore learning classes. And I think perhaps he was on the board or at the chair of one of the committees. And he's also been a class assistant, so he's one of us. So we're pleased to welcome Jim back to not to Alexandria, but to Encore Learning. He now lives in Charlottesville, and to tell us about the Coast Guard and things that we need to know about it. So Jim?
Well, thank you so much, Louise. I really appreciate Encore Learning inviting me. I want to recognize a few people. First was Joanne Jones. She was a coordinator for you people. We've known Joanne for years. And then, of course, Laura. And then David is our technician. He's very, very helpful. Louise, of course, did the introduction, handled the Q&A. And also been assisted, we did a little dry run on Friday by Chris McLaughlin. And so we have some very competent people there. And I must brag about Encore Learning because they have a lot of instructors that are very interesting. They come from all walks of life, State Department, and maybe some academia, but people like myself that have gained an interest in a subject matter are invited. So I'm happy to be a part of Encore Learning. I'm also very involved with the OSHA Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Virginia, where I've been teaching the Civil War for the last 8 years. So that's been very rewarding. Now, you probably have picked up that I have a wee bit of a Massachusetts accent. Well, I can't help it. I left there 57 years ago, and I guess I still have it. But don't worry, because David's going to turn on the closed captions. Are you ready to go, David?
Jim, I know we talked about this, but I really can't seem to find a closed caption function. I understand your concern, but can't quite seem to get that invoked.
Well, okay. It is what it is. I guess what I'm going to have to do is turn up the volume and turn down the accent. Okay.
Okay, Jim. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. But I do want to inform people that they do not have closed captions on Encore Learning, so I don't want to mislead you. Now, I have a lot of material to present today. I have a lot of PowerPoint slides, but I'm not going to kill you with information on that. A lot of them are renderings and pictures, and they'll go quite quickly, but I've got a lot to present. And I want to welcome my family. I want to welcome the people from Encore Learning. I want to welcome a bunch of Coast Guard people that I invited, many who I've served with, and also people down here in Charlottesville at OSHA Lifelong Learning Institute. So I hope that I'm able to provide something that is of good information to all of you. The Coast Guard is somewhat of a mystery to most people. The popular notion is one of a life-saving and boat safety service with guys in white hats on white ships, virtue personified. It is often referred to as the forgotten service. In actuality, it is the smallest of the 5 armed services, perhaps least known. Of the total 1.5 million active duty military in our country, the Coast Guard has 41,000 active duty. Now that's a small comparison wise, and we're only 3% of the armed forces and only 1/8 the size of the Navy. We're often mistaken to be part of the Navy. The Coast Guard has fought in every war following the American Revolution. The motto is small service, big job. So please keep this in mind during the presentation, as I will be showing you a small sample size of what the Coast Guard does in each mission and during wartime. By big job, I mean it is a unique national asset and a military service with a worldwide standard for superior maritime defense. However, many people have a little understanding of its true scope, abilities, value, or its missions. The primary distinction between the Coast Guard and the other four armed services is that it is also a law enforcement agency. That's quite unique. The service has the power of not having to comply with Posse Comitatus Act. That's an act that prohibits the other armed services from performing law enforcement on the high seas. Under Homeland Security, not the Defense Department, it is a unique because of its maritime law enforcement responsibilities. The Coast Guard places law enforcement detachments known as leadettes on Navy vessels to search suspect foreign boats or ships, seize drugs or illegal immigrants destined for the US. The budget for 2019 is about $12 billion. Historically underfunded, the Coast Guard has been under the Treasury Department. In 1967, it was transferred to the Department of Transportation, and finally it became a part of Homeland Security following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The primary mission is national defense, to protect our nation from enemies, foreign and domestic. Under Homeland Security, in my very humble opinion, it found a rightful home, for a major benefit has been a dramatic increase in funding for new ships, aircraft, boats during the past 18 years. Also, in my estimation, it's found a home because under Treasury, it didn't seem to fit well, but it was there for many, many years. Then under Transportation, while Transportation was a new agency, but it had a breadth of responsibility, including aircraft safety, highway safety, and things of that nature. So the Coast Guard just had a small role, comparatively speaking. Now, under Homeland Security, it fits. Coast Guard, Homeland Security. So I think we finally found the right agency. The Coast Guard remains very proud of its 230 years of continuous seagoing service. The operational word is continuous. We often kid our Navy friends, perhaps some watching today, that following the Revolutionary War, the Navy was disbanded briefly due to budget constraints, but was reestablished in 1794. The Coast Guard was originally known as a revenue cutter service. The Constitution had its beginnings in 1789 when George Washington was inaugurated as our country's first president. Now, the coastline of our nation was a lawless frontier with pirates smuggling and doing whatever they desired. Smuggling was rampant during our nation's struggle to throw off British taxation without representation. During 1789, the Secretary of Treasury was Alexander Hamilton. He was the first secretary, and he was tasked to create a seagoing customs service to stop smuggling. And that's why we came under Treasury. He set out by convincing Congress that he needed $10,000 for a fleet of 10 armed, heavy-keeled, schooner-type sailing vessels to be known as revenue cutters, because the new Customs Enforcement Service was to be deployed along the entire eastern seaboard. The new military armed service with a function was created on August 4th, 1790, and named the Revenue Cutter Service. It consisted of sloops and schooners, each less than 60 feet long, to patrol the coast. Each ship was manned by a crew of 10 with respectable character. All the ships were armed with swivel guns. Its custom enforcement responsibilities would soon be expanded to 7 primary missions. This is just the first of what happened to the Coast Guard in its history. In 1793, 10 armed sailing vessels identified as cutters were constructed and commissioned in service to the fledgling Armed Customs Enforcement Service. They were assigned to enforce laws and treaties and intercept foreign ships suspected of illegal acts, especially from England, France, and Spain. As a direct result, federal revenues increased fourfold when intercepted foreign vessels were escorted to ports and custom houses, and fines were assessed. The first officer commissioned as master of the cutter in service of the United States was Hopley Eaton. He was commissioned by President George Washington on March 21st, 1791, and quickly became a hero and a legend of the Coast Guard. One of the original 10 ships was christened the Revenue Cutter Pickering, as shown in this rendering. The Revenue Cutter Eagle, shown here capturing the French privateer Bonpierre, occurred when a faction of the Federalist Party sought to declare a quasi-war on France. During this time, the Revenue Cutter Service was also assigned to assist the Navy, and together they captured 20 French ships. However, our nation never declared war on France because the French were very instrumental in helping us win the Revolutionary War. In the spring of 1885, the Navy transferred the USS Revenue Cutter Bear, a wood-hulled sailing ship with a heavily reinforced bow designed to break ice. During 1866, the first commanding officer was assigned. That was Captain Hell-roaring Mike Healy. He was selected because he was a seasoned veteran of Alaska waters and a skilled commercial ice pilot. He also was the first African-American officer to receive a commission from the US government and the first to command a federal ship. Now, Captain Healy immediately took charge of Bear and sailed the ship for 9 years on Bering Sea patrols. The mission was twofold: to break ice for trailing commercial vessels and to provide humanitarian service to Native Alaskans. This encompassed between 15,000 and 20,000 miles of cruising on each patrol. The Bering Sea was often very harsh, extremely dangerous, stressful to sail, and at times deadly. Healy described officers standing arduous watches for many hours on the bridge, often suffering from very wet, cold, snowy, and icy conditions. The crew was often very hungry as they became hemmed in by impenetrable masses of fog, tortured by the uncertainty as the sturdy ship plunged into heavy waves, contending with ice seas in an unknown ocean. U.S. Coast Guard cutter Healy, named in honor of Captain Mike Healy, is the newest of the Coast Guard's 4 icebreakers. This 400-foot-long ship was commissioned in 1999 and is the largest, most technologically advanced icebreaker and the Coast Guard's largest vessel. She is classified as a medium icebreaker, homeported in Seattle. I'll talk more about icebreakers later in the program. In 1809, our country was on the verge of yet another war with England. The Navy consisted of only 16 ships. Therefore, Congress authorized the construction of 12 new revenue cutters to enforce embargoes on British ships while preventing us from entering the prolonged ongoing war between England and France. Finally, the War of 1812 was declared when the British Navy began impressing American sailors and enlisting them in their Navy. The Navy and Revenue Cutter Service were combined and consisted only of 28 ships, and certainly outmatched by the world-famous and feared 600-ship British Navy. Revenue Cutter Service later became the Coast Guard, thus began and has enjoyed a family-like relationship with our Navy partners over the past 218 years. In spite of the hardships imposed upon our country, the revenue cutters were small, two-masted schooners supporting 6 guns, such as the Vigilant, shown on the left on this rendering capturing the British ship Dart. Vigilant continued to perform admirably throughout the war. American merchantmen were adequately protected from privateers, while at the same time the cutters captured many British warships. Despite regular patrols by Royal Navy ships and man-of-wars, each outfitted with 12 to 36 guns, the Treasury Department assigned additional important missions in American waters for the revenue cutters. These included law enforcement and interdicting smugglers in the busiest waters, including the US-Canadian border. At the beginning of the Civil War, revenue cutter Harriet Lane was transferred to the Navy to take part in an expedition consisting of 3 ships sent to relieve Fort Sumter garrison. Harriet Lane immediately captured the Confederate blockade runner CSS Nashville by the first firing across the bow, as shown in this rendering. Homeported in New York City, she became one of the famous revenue cutters operating in the Caribbean to stop African slave trading and enforcing our nation's rights off the coast of South America. On May 11th, 1862, revenue cutter Miami, operating as part of a flotilla, assisted the Navy by landing 6,000 soldiers and 100 cavalry horses at Ocean View, Virginia. The crew then marched to Norfolk to help capture the city and the very strategically Confederate shipyard known as the Navy Shipyard, Norfolk Naval Shipyard. The revenue cutters services provided outstanding performance while serving our country. It earned its outstanding reputation while always establishing the traditions of today's Coast Guard as being always ready to defend our country. 11 years later, in 1848, the US famous life-saving service was established. It was responsible for operating lifeboat stations along the entire Atlantic Ocean and along the Great Lakes. It served admirably for many years along the eastern seaboard and earned the reputation of saving thousands of lives. The oldest life-saving station was located at Sandy Hook, New Jersey. As an example, on October 11th, 1896, life-saving service personnel assigned to the all-black Pea Island station in North Carolina, it's on the Outer Banks, shown in this photograph, performed a notable and daring rescue of crewmen from the E.S. Newman. Now long gone, the station was located along the Outer Banks near Cape Hatteras, whereby this portion of the Atlantic Ocean became famously known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Its reputation was due to the loss of countless lives from centuries of many shipwrecks, including merchant marine vessels sunk by Nazi submarines during World War I and World War II. The Coast Guard Act was passed by Congress on January 20th, 1915, and signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. The act renamed the Revenue Cutter Service the United States Coast Guard. It was a new military service, joining the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. It was modeled after the US Navy and placed under the Department of Treasury and Secretary Alexander Hamilton. Its men wore Navy-style uniforms and had the responsibility of protecting Americans' coastal cities and waters from hostile attack, enforcing customs duties and performing search and rescue at sea and in coastal environments. Also, the act combined the US Life-Saving Service with the Coast Guard. The first commandant was Commodore Ellsworth P. Berthoff, shown here in this photograph. He became famous, and the Berthoff, the Coast Guard's first state-of-the-art Legend-class maritime security vessel, was named after him. It was commissioned on the Coast Guard's birthday, August 4th, 2008. The ship is a 418-foot long, and its cost was $640 million. Now, 418 feet is not quite the size of a destroyer or destroyer escort in the Navy, but it is our largest seagoing ships. The Coast Guard has rightly earned a worldwide famous reputation for saving lives at sea. The life-saving service, perhaps more than any other previous agency, represents the service's traditional mission of saving lives. Their sailors enjoy a reputation of outstanding bravery, courage, and spirit. In fact, we have a training base on the West Coast, and a lot of foreign countries send Coast Guard people here to get Coast Guard training. The Lighthouse Service. On March 29, 1869, the Lime Rock, lighthouse keeper's daughter, 15-year-old Ida Lewis, known as the best swimmer in Newport, Rhode Island, became the lighthouse keeper. She became known as one of the best light keepers in the lighthouse service. She was initially assigned as the unofficial keeper of Newport, Rhode Island's lighthouse after her father became disabled due to a stroke. Later, she became the official lighthouse keeper from 1879 until 1911. This rendering illustrates her daring rescue of 4 drowning men that were clinging to an overturned sailboat. She was awarded the prestigious Gold Life-Saving Medal after rescuing 2 soldiers from nearby Fort Adams. They had unsuccessfully attempted to walk across thin ice from Lime Rock to the fort and fell into frigid waters. During her famous career, she was awarded numerous medals and awards for bravery and risking her life to save countless Americans. Following her death in 1911, Lime Rock Lighthouse was renamed the Ida Lewis Lighthouse in commemoration of her heroic deeds and her daring rescues. On July 1st, 1939, the Lighthouse Service was then merged with the Coast Guard. The service was now responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of all lighthouses and lightships along both coasts and the Great Lakes. Years later, during the 1970s and 1980s, all the lighthouses were automated except Boston Light. It remains occupied, required by law, to protect ships and sailors entering Boston Harbor. In April 1917, the Coast Guard again was transferred in its entire fleet to the Navy. Coast Guard cutters joined Navy vessels in European waters for convoy escort duties. Coast Guard cutter Seneca, as shown in this background of this rendering, was escorting a Merchant Marine 21-ship convoy during a famous trip to Gibraltar, when on September 16, 1918, a German submarine torpedoed the tanker USS Wellington. The U-boat surfaced as Seneca approached the distressed tanker. Seneca's crew fired 3 shots, and after the submarine submerged, Seneca began dropping depth charges and chased the U-boat away from the convoy. Now, upon boarding the Wellington, 20 Coast Guardsmen were informed that most of the crew was about to abandon ship. Coast Guard First Lieutenant Fletcher W. Brown took charge of the tanker, and his crewmen used pumps to control the flooding. After several hours of struggling to keep the tanker afloat and battling high winds and seas, Brown called upon the Navy to assist them to remove the 2 crews before the ship sank. The Seneca saved the entire crew of the torpedoed tanker. As a result of their gallantry and devoted service, Seneca's crew, living and deceased, were awarded the Navy Cross, Navy's highest and most distinguished award except the Medal of Honor. Also during World War I, the Coast Guard suffered the highest percentage of casualties of all the armed services. Now, the world never thought that there would be another great war like the size of World War I. It was so-called the Great War for that. Consequently, Congress decided to drastically reduce the size of our armed forces as the country took on a policy of neutrality over the next 20 years. Enter World War II. During 1941, President Roosevelt saw that our country would undoubtedly enter into the war soon. During that year, the Coast Guard assisted England and France by seizing 28 Italian, 2 German, and 35 Danish merchant vessels that were controlled by Nazi forces. At the same time, 10 modern Coast Guard ships were transferred to Britain under the new land lease program signed by Roosevelt and Churchill. Anticipating the upcoming war, the Coast Guard was transferred to the Navy on November 1st, just 5 weeks before Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The country entered into the war at 7:55 a.m. December 7th, 1941. The Japanese Imperial Navy launched a surprise naval air and submarine attack on the Navy's Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. During the devastating attack, battleships Arizona, California, and Utah, along with 16 other warships, were sunk. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt called to Congress and declared war and famously stated that December 7th, 1941 will be a date which will live in infamy. Coast Guard personnel assigned to the cutter Taney docked at Pier 7, Honolulu Harbor, shown here in this rendering, manned battle stations. They used 3-inch guns and 50 caliber machine guns to fire upon Japanese aircraft during their second and third waves. Taney became famous as it saw action throughout the entire war. It was assigned convoy escort duty in both the Pacific and the Mediterranean theaters. In 1945, she was also involved with the famous Okinawa campaign. During the invasion, her duties were varied and numerous. She valiantly defended the Navy fleet from Japanese kamikaze attacks and shot down several planes, thus saving the destruction of many ships, as well as many Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard lives. Taney is now a museum in Baltimore Harbor, and I encourage you to visit her next time you are visiting the Inner Harbor. The major role that the Coast Guard played during the war resulted in the service increasing from, believe it or not, 12,000 to 241,000 personnel, a 20-fold increase. They played an important part in operations in the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and extensively in the Pacific Ocean. In the Atlantic, they provided valuable escort services and performed many daring rescues, especially of mariners on sinking merchant marine ships, sailing in the treacherous and foreboding North Atlantic during the winters. They were also credited with sinking 12 of the 226 U-boats during the war. Now, the Coast Guard has fought in every theater of the war. Navy and Coast Guard sailors trained together and manned each other's ships, as the equipment, guns, and ordnance were common to all ships. During the war, the Coast Guard lost 16 ships, as well as 12 Coast Guard manned Navy vessels, losing more than 1,000 personnel during the operations. Another major mission was manning Navy LSTs, as shown in this photograph, and also manning LCMs, as shown in this photo. During the war, the Coast Guard assigned personnel on foot to watch the coastlines, in vehicles or on horseback, as they patrolled the shores and docks on both coasts. The Coast Guard manned 802 cutters and boats, 351 Navy ships and craft, and this is very little known, 228 Army vessels. Nearly 2,000 Coast Guardsmen were decorated and killed during the war, about a third of which was combat related. The Coast Guard's only one person awarded the Medal of Honor was Signalman First Class Douglas A. Monroe, when he was killed during amphibious landings at the very bloody and costly Battle of Guadalcanal. Monroe received the decoration for his actions on September 27th, 1942, while assigned as officer in charge of a detachment of 5 landing craft to rescue many retreating Marines as overwhelming Japanese forces attacked them as they desperately made their escape to the shoreline. Notified of the situation, Monroe volunteered to rescue the Marines. Exposed to heavy machine gun fire, he brought his detachment to the shoreline Seeing the 4 other craft struggling to rescue the Marines, Monroe maneuvered his boat between the beachhead and the other boats. He heroically manned a machine gun and to provide effective cover for the Marines on the beach. As a direct result of his fast thinking and swift actions, every Marine was rescued. Monroe, concerned about his own life, was fatally shot, but he remained conscious long enough just to ask 4 words: did they get off? As a result of receiving the Medal of Honor, Monroe's actions in life has been celebrated by naming 2 cutters after him. The Coast Guard was also a vital part of rescue operations during the famous D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. Their very high-risk mission was landing Army troops on numerous beaches. The action came about when President Franklin D. Roosevelt became acutely aware of Winston Churchill's concerns of the dangers of landing Allied troops ashore on the beaches of France. To be successful, they would need an experienced and dedicated water rescue force. Consequently, Roosevelt turned to the Coast Guard to perform the mission and volunteered a fleet of 60 cutters that had been used to patrol the East Coast during the dangerous German U-boats to rescue soldiers stranded or dying in the water. Now, the Navy recognizes the Coast Guard for their heroic actions. Coast Guardsmen and cutters were very vital to Allied naval operations during the entire war. Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, remarked that the Coast Guard had, and I quote, earned the respect and deepest appreciation of both the Navy and the Marine Corps. Its performance of duty has been without exception in keeping with the highest traditions of the service. Recently, Secretary of Navy Richard V. Spencer named one of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the 509-foot-long 30-knot USS Quentin Walsh, in honor of World War II Coast Guard captain who recently died on March 18, 2000. Captain Walsh was credited with commanding a 53-man special task force assigned to capture the vital port of Cherbourg, France. Despite sustaining heavy casualties, his small force seized the port facilities, took over the entire control of the harbor the day after they entered the city. He was able to persuade the German prisoner of war camp, Commandant, that he, Walsh, commanded a much larger force. The deception resulted in freeing 52 US Army paratroopers. Also, the German garrison became occupied and 700 Nazi soldiers surrendered. Walsh was awarded the Navy Cross, the Navy's second highest award for his heroic and courageous actions during the liberation of Cherbourg, France. Rather than the 2 previous wars, whereby the Coast Guard functioned as a part of the Navy, they operated independently as a unit during the Korean War. Early on, they trained the South Korean Coast Guard personnel when the surprise North Korean attack broke out on June 1950 and the war began. In addition, 22 cutters called ocean station vessels served on lonely outposts. They conducted vital weather duty to provide the UN ground, naval, and air forces with important weather information that affected their operations. The cutters also provided communication support and plane guards, ready to rescue air crews shot down at sea. They were well positioned to assist troop and supply transports on the way to and from Korea, as well as during the rest of the war. Vietnam War. From the beginning of the Vietnam War in 1965, and for the next 5 years, Coast Guard Squadron 1 was a combat unit of 26 82-foot patrol boats, designed and built for search and rescue and law enforcement missions, served beside the Navy, augmenting Operation Market Time. Now, these patrol boats were actually brought from primarily the East Coast, put on Navy transport ships, and shipped over to Vietnam. The patrol boats cruised over 4 million miles, inspected more than 280,000 vessels, often capturing their crews and the weapons that were being smuggled into South Vietnam for use by the Viet Cong. They're shown in these three photographs. They were very successful in interdicting hundreds of suspicious Viet Cong and North Vietnamese boats that were concealing arms and supplies while transiting the South China Sea to South Vietnam. The blockade changed the dynamics of the war, forcing the North Vietnamese to use a costlier and more time-consuming route to supply their troops in South along with the famous Ho Chi Minh Trail. Also, 5 high-endurance cutters, similar to the famous World War II cutter Ingham, a sister ship of the Taney, shown in this photograph, provided naval gun support to protect nearby friendly units while operating along the entire South Vietnamese coastline. Known as Squadron 3, their mission also included engaging enemy trawlers, holding them off until Navy and Coast Guard patrol boats destroyed them. 8,000 Coast Guardsmen served the war, and 6 squadron members were lost. As the war started to wind down during 1969 and 1970, most of the boats and the major cutters were transferred to the South Vietnamese Navy as part of the Vietnamization program. Now, General Wallace Greene Jr., Commandant of the Marine Corps, was quoted as saying, and I quote, "I want to make sure that the Coast Guard personnel assigned to missions in Vietnam know that I am often hearing great things about them, and I am very pleased with what I hear." At the onset of the Middle East conflict, Operation Iraqi Freedom, in 2002, the Coast Guard deployed 8 patrol boats and 600 personnel to the Persian Gulf. It was the Coast Guard's largest fleet of patrol boats outside the United States. They played a key role in maritime security and infrastructure protection. They also supported Operation Enduring Freedom, providing continuous maritime presence on the seas. They served under the Navy's 5th Fleet, using combat-ready assets throughout the area from their base of operations in Bahrain. The boats, such as Chandelier, shown in this photograph, patrol the Persian Gulf to regulate maritime traffic, perform boardings, search and rescue, and seize enemy vessels. I want to move into what's known as the Arctic, Antarctic, and Alaska patrols, something that not many people are aware of. The Coast Guard has had the responsibility for conducting Arctic, Antarctic, and Alaskan patrols. Since 1955, it has been the lead federal agency for the United States Antarctic program. Also, the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Coast Guard have jointly assisted in providing air and maritime support throughout the Antarctic region. A typical deployment is 4 months. 8 icebreakers constructed in the 1940s were relatively new when they were either transferred from the Navy or built specifically for the Coast Guard. Eastwind was the 5th of 5 Wind-class icebreakers built for the Coast Guard and commissioned on June 3rd, 1944, in time to see action near the end of World War II. In 1967, Eastwind became the first cutter to ever sail around the Antarctica. The 44-year-old heavy icebreaker, Polar Star, is the oldest of the 4 remaining commissioned icebreakers and the only one that can navigate the Antarctic. It can break ice up to 21 feet thick by using 3 75,000 horsepower gas turbine engines augmented by 6 3,000 horsepower diesel engines. Navigating into the sea by a series of backing and ramming movements, riding up on the ice and performing side-to-side rolling motions, it can break the ice. It can steam continuously through 6 feet of ice at 3 knots. Also, by increasing speed to upwards of 18 knots, it performs Operation Deep Freeze, which is an annual joint military service mission in support of the National Science Foundation. To enter McMurdo Sound, Antarctica, the Polar Star will normally break 17 miles of 6 to 10 foot ice at 3 to 5 knots. A large Navy-leased commercial vessel follows Polar Star and will offload over a 10-day period 500 containers containing 10 million pounds of goods. This provides a 12-month resupply for the personnel working at the McMurdo Antarctic Research Station, located near the south tip of Ross Island, as well as at many other field camps. The station was established in February 1956 and is the logistics hub of the U.S. Antarctic program, with a harbor, landing strips on ice, sea ice and shelf ice, and a helicopter pad. Its 85 or so buildings and infrastructure provides support for upwards of 1,000 scientists, their families, and support personnel. Now, unbelievably, there are only 3 Coast Guard icebreakers currently in service. I mentioned earlier that we have 4 commissioned. 1 was taken out of condition, Polar Sea, because Polar Star, because it was just couldn't be maintained anymore. By comparison, this is dwarfed by Russia's fleet of 65 icebreakers, including 5 nuclear-powered and 8 under construction. Also, China has 8 in commission, while Canada has 18 nuclear-powered and icebreakers. Therefore, the United States is extremely deficit in protecting assets such as oil, natural gas, and minerals located in the polar regions. I want to talk about the new polar security cutter. Congress designated the Coast Guard as the nation's lead agency responsible for providing surface access in both polar regions. The Coast Guard has continuously reminded Congress and the President that, quote, it cannot meet the challenges of tomorrow's Arctic and today's paradigms and ships. Finally, within the past 2 years, Congress has appropriated funds for a new Arctic strategic outlook to keep pace with Russian, Canadian, and Chinese icebreakers. On April 23rd, 2019, the Coast Guard and Navy entered a joint partnership by means of an integrated program office. Using an acquisition staff, they awarded a $745 million contract to VT Halter Marine Incorporated at Pascagoula, Mississippi, for the design and construction of a large 33,000-ton state-of-the-art polar security cutter. The Joint Coast Guard Navy Acquisition Program will support a wide range of missions to assure access and presence in the polar regions that are vital to our nation's defense and our precious assets. Construction of the first icebreaker will begin this year, with delivery planned in 2024. Also, there have been contract incentives that are provided for an earlier delivery. The contract also includes the option for the construction of 2 additional icebreakers. Now, if all options are exercised, the total contract value is estimated at $1.9 billion. The multi-year, multi-billion dollars contract marks an important step towards providing for the nation's eventual requirement of 6 polar icebreakers. These are considered the bare minimum for our nation to meet unique mission demands that have emerged from increased commerce, tourism, research, and international activities in both the Arctic and Antarctic regions. The 2 other icebreakers that are in commission are the 240-foot Mackinac, operating solely on the Great Lakes to break ice for commercial vessels transiting between the United States and Canada, and the 420-foot Healy, which I had previously mentioned, for Arctic operations. Now, the Healy, to my knowledge, cannot go to the Antarctic. It's only what they call a medium icebreaker. Only the Polar class can go down there. Healy and Polar Star each deploy with 2 HH-65 Dolphin helicopters for reconnaissance purposes. The Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea are both hazardous and difficult environments for people to survive. Fish are abundant in these areas that are the most fertile fishing grounds in the world. Annually, around the clock, winter and summer, ships from Poland, Korea, Taiwan, the People's Republic of China, Japan, and Russia drag their nets through extremely frigid waters to pull in thousands of tons of fish. They are processed in huge factory ships, freezing the fish in blocks and returning to their home ports with their holds full. During the annual Alaska Fisheries Patrol, high and medium draft cutters with HH-65 helicopters on board are often dispatched to monitor the movement of foreign fishing fleets to ensure compliance with international treaties and laws. When a foreign ship is spotted, suspected of violating treaties, it is ordered to stop. One or more armed boarding teams are dispatched to inspect the holds. One or more armed, these people have arms so that they can defend themselves. If violations have occurred, the ship is required to follow the cutter to either Kodiak or Adak with law enforcement personnel on board. The ship's captain and other senior crew members are often required to remain in federal custody to await trial. Large fines are oftentimes assessed before the ship's master and the crews are released to return to their homeland. Rescue Swimmer Program. The famous Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer Program was established in 1973 as part of the search and rescue mission. It was very effective during the Hurricane Katrina and during major at-sea rescue operations. Aviation technical rescue survival personnel undergo basic training as an arduous 24-week program. To become a qualified rescue swimmer, however, the entire training program takes about a year and is on a par with the Navy SEAL program. As with the SEALs program, it is extremely, extremely intensive with a very high attrition rate. Only about 1 in 5 candidates graduate from a school located in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Now, if you have read the book or seen the movie The Guardian, starring Kevin Costner, you witness the danger of rescuing fishing boats along the 1,000-mile Aleutian chain in Alaska and the Bering Sea during harrowing sea conditions and weather. Now, I was stationed at Kodiak for 2 years as a public works officer, and I got to know a lot of aviators and really got to appreciate the arduous flying that they had to do. Also, the Coast Guard was featured in the award-winning movie, The Perfect Storm, starring George Clooney. You can also see many rescue operations on television watching Coast Guard Alaska. Now, I want to present an interesting situation that I met. I'm talking about the perfect storm. It really was a reenaction of what happened. A little background here. Back in World War II, the USS Zuni, an ocean-going tug roughly 220 feet long, was highly decorated for action in the Pacific conflict. After being torpedoed and surviving, she towed a battleship back to her Pearl Harbor, a journey of 1,000 miles. She also towed 4 large battleships back to the yards in Pearl Harbor and saved a lot of seamen. The Zuni was herself put in dry dock and 10 feet cut off her battle-damaged hull, and at the end of the war, transferred to the Coast Guard. So I point this out because you can see the tremendous pulling strength that this tug had. We had 3 of them in the Coast Guard. She spent 40 years doing search and rescue, drug interdiction, fisheries patrols in the Atlantic, and ice patrols. The ship was also deployed for Mariel boat lift off Cuba and rode out at least 3 hurricanes while I was stationed on her. Now, I'm talking about the commanding officer. I had the opportunity to meet the commanding officer shortly after the perfect storm. His name is Larry Bradnicki. He's now a retired captain, motivational speaker for a lot of major corporations that deal with fear and courage, because he has a lot of experience with the fear and courage. Now, there was an article I downloaded from the internet by Reverend Keith Wright. Keith was the radioman in charge on Tamaroa during Perfect Storm hurricane that occurred in the North Atlantic in late October 1991. And he states, and I quote, "I had the pleasure of serving on Coast Guard cutter Tamaroa. People will often make fun of the Coast Guard until it is their ship or boat that is floundering in rough seas. For example, when a sailing vessel Centauri sent out a SOS during the hurricane, we immediately got underway from a home port on the Coast Guard's Governor's Island, located in New York Harbor, and rescued 3 people from the Centauri. We then headed toward a New York National Guard helicopter that had gone down with the crew in the water. We got everyone out but one. Next, we headed toward the Andrea Gail, a fishing vessel out of Gloucester, Mass, which was featured in the movie. They were out to sea, taking chances, taking the risks, knowing that the weather was going to change, and they were on their way to the Flemish Gap, which is a very dangerous area in the far reaches of the North Atlantic. The movie about this rescue used the Coast Guard cutter Vigorous, which is a 210-foot medium endurance cutter, as Tamaroa was decommissioned by then. Today, Tamaroa lies at the bottom of the ocean as an artificial reef. This was a good ending for this war hero, much better than rusting away and turning into scrap metal. In early 1992, while I was stationed at Coast Guard headquarters, Washington, D.C., I had the opportunity to meet the Lieutenant Commander Larry Bradnicki, who was the commanding officer at the time of the rescues. He described to me the harrowing situation that Tamaroa faced during the search and rescue operation. When I queried him about the mission, he told me words to the effect, and I quote, "Jim, Tamaroa was only one of 3 Coast Guard ships that was capable of undertaking such rescue, with winds of 100 knots and seas, this is, believe it or not, seas up to 60 feet high. Perfect storm was the result of 3 weather situations. There was a stalled low pressure area, which was eventually joined by an Arctic high pressure area and a low pressure area arriving from the Caribbean. The collision of the 3 events created a perfect storm, one that had never been recorded in history. Tamaroa, 210-foot ocean-going tug, had the deepest draft of any Coast Guard ship. Its righting arm, I'm going to explain a little bit about righting arm. It's physics, if you will. When a ship is designed and built, they have, of course, the center of gravity. But what's very important is the center of buoyancy, which has to be above the center of gravity for it to become stable. So when a ship turns and heels, like the Tamaroa did, in heavy seas, it calls on a righting arm. That is the moment that brings the ship back to the upright so that it won't capsize. I gathered the entire, this is Bradnicki now. I gathered the entire crew on the mess deck before we set sail and explained to them the situation that were, and there were crew, part of the crew that were married and had children. And he gave them the opportunity to not be involved with this operation because it was so risky. As the old Coast Guard saying, a motto goes, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. Not a single man left the ship. I asked him if many of the crew became seasick, and he responded, all but 2, the helmsman and myself. The most dangerous part of the rescue operations was the rescue of the National Guardsmen. Excuse me. They were on a similar mission with air rescue men on board. Now, they ran very low on fuel, and a KC-135 Air Force refueler attempted to refuel them by means of a long boom that runs from the tail of the plane to the receptacle on top center of the helicopter directly above the cockpit. However, the heavy turbulence resulted in the KC-135 aborting the refueling and head back to the air station. As the helo descended and was preparing to crash into the ocean, an evolution that usually drowns both the pilot and the co-pilot, the crew started bailing out. One of the first air rescue men apparently dropped 60 feet, breaking his back, but was able to survive and make it to a raft. Another crewman drowned. The remaining 9 or 10 crewmen also survived, including the pilot and co-pilot. And they were floating in rafts awaiting for the arrival of the Coast Guard in these heavy seas and arduous weather. They were extremely fortunate to have lived, and when Tamaroa arrived on scene, it was very challenging rescuing the men. Fishing nets were used and the men were pulled aboard the main deck. Brutal force, if you will. This photograph shows an aviation survival technician during rescue swimming, which is deployed from an HH-65A helicopter. Now, this is a training exercise, is what you see here. Now, I want to talk about 5 major life-saving events that have occurred within our lifetime. 4 major life-saving events actually occurred in recent history, and you may recall them. The 427-foot cruise liner Holland America, Prinsendam, with 350 passengers and a crew of 520 on board, was sailing through the Gulf of Alaska when at midnight on October 4th, 1980, a major out-of-control fire broke out in the huge fire room. A radio call that requested immediate assistance was received at Coast Guard Communications Station Kodiak, Alaska, and several Coast Guard and nearby merchant vessels were alerted and responded to the situation. Coast Guard Air Station Kodiak and Coast Guard Air Station Sitka immediately dispatched C-130s and helicopters to search for the vessel. 2 378-foot high-endurance cutters, the Boutwell and the Mellon, and buoy tender Woodrush, responded to the rescue in concert with the 2 merchant vessels that were in the vicinity. The rescue took place during a period of steadily worsening conditions, which was always predictable in Alaska. Tragically, Prinsendam capsized and sank a week later. The rescue was particularly noteworthy because of the vast differences traveled by the rescuers, the coordination of independent organizations, and the fact that all 520 passengers and crew were rescued without a loss or serious injury. Terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center. September 11th, 2001 will be a day that we will never forget. We will always recall where and when we were when we heard about the 4 commercial jets that were hijacked by terrorists, carrying out Osama bin Laden's orders to kill as many Americans as possible in the World Trade Center's Twin Towers, as well as the Pentagon, and perhaps even the White House or Congress. Immediately following the attacks, the Coast Guard coordinated the largest maritime evacuation in American history, assisting more than 500,000 people to be transported through New York Harbor to safe locations. The entire mission was carried out by hundreds of vessels in or near New York Harbor that answered the distress call. Hurricane Katrina, as shown in this aerial photograph, occurred on August 29th, 2005. It was classified a Category 3 with sustained winds of 125 knots. It battered the coasts off Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida. The New Orleans area was completely devastated. The Coast Guard was the first federal agency to respond for rescue operations. Of course, FEMA was there first, and I think we may recall the agency head, Brown, really didn't do a good job. So the Coast Guard came on in. Of course, FEMA could not rescue them. They were there to just observe. Within merely a few hours, many helicopters and small boats were on scene to rescue survivors. Air stations throughout the country provided helicopters and crews to the greater New Orleans area to augment local Coast Guard commands. More than 5,000 people, Coast Guard people, were involved, flying helicopters, operating small boats around the clock, several days, performing vital rescue operations. Despite the fact that almost half of the New Orleans Coast Guard's personnel lost their homes in the hurricane, they faithfully remained on duty and rescued or evacuated more than 33,500 survivors, 6 times as many as the Coast Guard had saved the previous year. At one point during the operations, the Coast Guard transported an average 750 people to safety each hour. It was one of the largest search and rescue operations in Coast Guard history. Now, Sheriff Jack Stevens of the completely decimated St. Bernard Parish, east of New Orleans, stated that the Coast Guard was the only federal agency to provide any significant assistance for a full week after the storm. Here are two other photographs of Coast Guard helicopters making rescues. Hurricane Sandy occurred on October 29th, 2012, impacting 24 states. The storm surge hit New Jersey and New York City, flooding streets, tunnels, and subway lines, and cutting power in and around the city. Damage amounted to $65 billion. Here's an aerial view of the storm as it lashed along the coast of New Jersey. And here's another view of severe flooding and damages along the shoreline as seen from a Coast Guard helicopter. Previous to Sandy's landfall, the Coast Guard pre-positioned resources to better ensure the service's ability to support search and rescue operations. 833 active duty personnel were deployed to the affected areas to support response efforts. They responded to over 559 federal pollution cases and saved 35 lives. The Coast Guard also coordinated with partners such as the Corps of Engineers to inspect and assess damage in ports and waterways and shore facilities. A few years ago, during an unprecedented hurricane season, the Coast Guard responded, rescued, or assisted 12,000 victims from severely flooded communities in Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Many rescues were made by means of helicopters and small boats. Now, I've covered a lot about the Coast Guard and its years of devoted service. I want to now address some of the newest assets that the Coast Guard has been fortunate to acquire through the much increased funding through Department of Homeland Security. National Security Cutter. These new 418-foot cutters, known as the National Security Cutters, are built primarily for military defense and maritime safety. A fleet of 11 are authorized, 9 have been built and are operational. They are the largest cutters in the fleet, replacing the 50-year-old 370-foot high-endurance cutters. This 360-foot ship in the rendering are the Coast Guard's highest priority acquisition. Contracts have been underway to construct 25 ships, are scheduled for delivery beginning in 2021, that's this year. They will feature state-of-the-art technology and will replace the service's 35-year-old 270-foot and 50-year-old 210-foot medium-endurance cutters, which are becoming increasingly expensive to operate and maintain. They will enforce federal laws, secure our maritime borders, disrupt transnational criminal organizations, and respond to 21st century threats. They will be the backbone of the Coast Guard's strategy to project and maintain offshore presence. Now seen here is the Fast Response Cutter. These 154-foot ships are new to the fleet and used for national defense, search and rescue, coastal security, fisheries, and law enforcement missions. They replace the aging 35-year-old 110-foot patrol boats. These new 87-foot patrol boats, as shown in this photograph, are multi-mission, high-speed craft that combat drug smuggling and illegal immigration while enforcing maritime fisheries and Coast Guard laws and search and rescue. Oh, I have today, I think, several of my Coast Guard aviator friends. So I'm going to talk about Coast Guard aviation. Excuse me. The Coast Guard is approximately total 200 fixed wing and helicopters total, operating out of 24 air stations that are strategically located throughout the continental US, Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. The largest helicopter shown here is the Sikorsky M60 Jayhawk. Their frames are very similar to the Navy's Seahawk and the Army's Blackhawk. It is a multi-mission twin-engine medium-range helicopter used extensively for search and rescue, law enforcement, military readiness, and marine environmental protection. Also, since 9/11, armed Jayhawk helicopters operate in high-risk areas such as Washington, D.C., and in the Caribbean for national defense and anti-terrorism missions. Our fixed-wing aircraft operate on long-duration missions, whereas the helicopters operate and deploy for shorter distances. They are used to perform search and rescue, or spot vessels smuggling illegal immigrants or narcotics. Now, these fixed-wing aircraft, once they spot these vessels, they can vector in Coast Guard ships or other Coast Guard helicopters to help out. The new CASA HC-144 is built in Spain as a medium-range aircraft used for search and rescue and maritime patrol missions. The new Alenia C-27J is a military transport aircraft similar to the Lockheed Martin C-130s. They're designed and manufactured through a joint venture between Lockheed Martin and the Italian firm Leonardo Aircraft. Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Carl L. Schultz was recently interviewed by Sea Power, the official publication of the Navy League. He stated, and I quote, "There's very little discussion here in our nation about border security and immigration. I contend that the work the Coast Guard does every day pushes the borders out, interdicting at sea illicit narcotics, particularly cocaine, that comes out of the one region in the world before it reaches Central America and Mexico. Now, if we can stop it at sea, it minimizes the violence. When you minimize the violence, it in turn minimizes corruption. I think that our border security role, our ability to push the borders out, is very important." Now, regarding Homeland Security, Schultz also went on to say, quote, "Our work domestically, continuously protecting the homeland is often lost in the daily chatter and noise. We will continue to invest a tremendous amount of energy every day in and around our nation's seaports to ensure that our homeland is safe. That's why whatever threat, whatever the challenges of Homeland Security, combatant commanders of our nation's maritime industry, they can rely on the Coast Guard being out in front. That's part of why we are so special to the defense of our great nation." In summary, the Coast Guard's operational mission is 80% peacetime oriented, while 20% is to prepare for national defense and war. Of course, during major conflicts, such as World War I and World War II, the primary mission is to be combat ready and operate under the Navy. It truly is a small service with a big job and provides the biggest bang for the buck for American taxpayers. The famous and traditional motto, Semper Paratus, Latin for always ready, is a constant reminder to all of us that the Coast Guard continues to provide outstanding readiness posture and is eager to provide for our national defense. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely thank you for your interest and your attention, and hope that I've perhaps increased your knowledge and appreciation of the United States Coast Guard. And I thank you. Before we get to the questions and answers, I just wanted to mention a few things. Although I was in the Coast Guard for 30 years, I was a civil engineer for 24 of those years. Often our operators call this a very sheltered community, whatever. But I got to know a lot of Coast Guard aviators. I was around a lot of aviation facilities, got to know a lot of seagoing ship drivers. But I don't know everything. And in the audience today, we have Coast Guard people that are experts. So in the questions and answers, if I can't answer it, I may call on the Coast Guard people out there. And all you have to do, if you're sitting out there, is just raise your hand, and you will be unmuted by David Tate, and feel free to enter in and answer the question. Also, I welcome Coast Guard personnel here today to maybe add some value to this speech, and maybe provide some more information that would be of general interest to our community. Thank you again.
Well, Jim, thank you for this very informative presentation. I really can't say enough about it. I just think it's interesting. It's enlightening to us. It's makes us proud of the Coast Guard and all that you do for us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I really can't say enough. I would like to get to the questions and answers in a second, but before I do, I would like to mention to everyone our upcoming programs. So I'm just going to take a break for that for the moment. On March 8th, in recognition of International Women's Day, we will be having a presentation called One Hell of a Ride and One Woman's Journey to Scientific Discovery and Breaking Glass Ceilings, the story of Miriam Sarachek, and she's had quite a life story in the scientific area and also a dramatic story herself in her personal life. That's March 8th. And then on March 22nd, there will be a presentation by Eric Ackerman about the hurricane in Puerto Rico, the inside story of lights out and lights on, rebuilding the electric grid in Puerto Rico after the hurricane down there. So those sound like very interesting presentations. So please do join us for that. So Jim, we have quite a few questions. So I think you're gonna have to limit your time on each one, but I'll just take you through in the order that they're presented, okay?
Okay.
First of all, when did the Coast Guard pick orange as its color?
Oh, good question. Well, it's the famous orange stripe that you see on vessels. And that,
Right.
I think that was designed when we went over to the transportation. And ironically, you'll see many Coast Guards throughout the world that have copied our stripe. And I think that's where we brought in the orange and blue.
Okay. The next question is, what role, if any, did the U.S. House Merchant Marine and Fisheries Coast Guard Subcommittee have on your service?
Well, it was a very famous subcommittee that provides the authorization and appropriation of our annual funds. The Commandant and some of his staff go up annually on the Hill during hearings, budget hearings, to present the Coast Guard's program and answer any questions. I've gone to one of those meetings and I find it very contentious. I was very, very offended that a 4-star admiral who was put under the microscope, if you will, by congressmen, but that's just the name of the game.
Yeah. The next question is, was Healy's ship, the Bear, involved in the Greely polar expedition rescue in 1884?
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm. Let me just say that oftentimes, or sometimes, ships will get stuck in the ice up there. And I think Bear had 1 or 2 incidences where they just could not get home. And they had to wait out through the winter. Fortunately, they have a lot of provisions on board, and it's called wintering over.
Okay. How difficult was it for Coast Guard cutters to intercept Al Capone's rum runners during Prohibition because of the unbreakable code they used? And was Elizabeth Smith Friedman hired to break the code?
Well, that's an excellent question. I have to admit that I had no knowledge of that mission. So maybe when I'm done with the Q&A, somebody out there, Coast Guardsmen, might be able to lend some more information on that.
Okay. The Coast Guard participated in 1991's Operation Storm in the Middle East. Can you tell us anything more about the Coast Guard's role in that?
Well, we were involved with Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and what our role was primarily is we sent our patrol boats over there and some large vessels. A lot of it was for port security and for sailing out there and providing any type of military support that was needed. They are still over there because of our commitments in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Okay. Somebody asked, would you tell us a little bit more about Captain Mike Healy?
Well, interesting. I sat on a board that was to name the first new icebreaker. And I found out a lot about him, people around the table. He was a hard drinking African-American. He was light-skinned. In fact, I think a lot of people didn't realize he was African-American. Not that it matters, but we can brag that he was the first African-American that was commissioned in any federal agency. Other than that, I don't know that much about him. He lived a long life. I think he was married, but he was gone a lot if he was.
Oh, okay. And David Tate, I think you might have something to add on this.
I do.
That's what showed on my screen, but if not, I'll keep going on. Where is the polar cutter being built? Is a question for you, Jim.
Well, that's at, I mentioned the shipyard earlier. I think it's Pascagoula, Mississippi. You know, in our country, the shipyards have been pretty much diminished. A lot of the Navy shipyards have closed down. They've contracted out, and that's where we're at. Very few Navy shipyards remain, but so we do everything through contracts.
Okay. Where are Coast Guard cutters usually kept? Are there hubs?
Yes, that's a good question. Along both coasts and up in Alaska, Coast Guard cutters have home ports. We're looking at major cities like New York, Boston, Chicago, New Orleans, Miami, Texas. We have 2 or 3 stations in Texas. Then when you go out to the West Coast, they have Long Beach and Alameda, where our headquarters is for the Pacific area. And then you come up the coast, we've got some in Oregon and in Washington State. And then finally in Alaska, we've got Kodiak and Sitka, big air stations. And there's Coast Guard ships that are berthed there. Now, ironically, there are no Navy left in Alaska. So we are the only seagoing service up there in Alaska.
Are these dedicated Coast Guard bases? Or are they part of naval bases?
No, they are dedicated Coast Guard bases. But let me just caveat that by saying that our air stations, because we don't have controllers, air controllers, we have to rely on either the Navy or the Air Force or civilian airports. So we rent space to hangar our aircraft and do the maintenance there, but the runways are maintained by other services. Now, we do have a runway at Elizabeth City. We have a big base down there, and we maintain that runway.
Okay. When the Coast Guard and crew go up to Alaska, do the families come with them?
Yes, for the most part. Like when I was there, I had my family with us. We had very, very good housing at the time. Well, let me just say this. We acquired the Kodiak facility from the Navy around 1973. The Navy, after the earthquake of 1964, where they surfaced down near the fuel farm where we keep all the oil and everything for the ships that come in, it actually sank about 4 feet. So the Navy at that point in time were planning to move to Adak and establish a new base. So Kodiak was left, and we had an air station there. We thought maybe some oil industry would come in and take over the facility because of the oil revenue in Alaska. But no, Congress said the Coast Guard should remain. So we took over this air station. I think I was the 2nd or 3rd public works officer there. It was a deplorable situation. The housing was old. There were virtually no new structures. We put together a 30-year development plan, which is a master plan, and it's all come to fruition. So now it's a very, very desirable location. If you like Alaska, you either love it or you hate it. Lots of fishing and hunting. Yes, but and then of course Sitka has an air station there.
Gotcha. I think this might be a question or a comment by a friend of yours, Ben. He
Ben
says, what?
Ben Stoppy, he always keeps me honest.
No history of Coast Guard aviation? Question mark, question mark, question mark. You want to comment?
Oh, yeah, well, he's just pulling my chain. Ben and I are good friends. Ben is an aviator. I was stationed with him twice at headquarters, but no, he's become a very good friend, and he's a helicopter pilot and a very good one.
Gotcha.
I got to tell you this joke. I always wanted to be in the Coast Guard has this fraternity, if you will, called the pterodactyls. These are really primarily for entertainment and camaraderie and friendship. And not being an aviator, I was asked, well, how do I get in the pterodactyls? And they told me, oh, you can't come down here, you're not qualified. Well, lo and behold, I was able to join the pterodactyls. All I wanted was money. And I've gone to what they call several roosts. Now, these roosts are supported by Ben and his wife, Ann. They've done a lot of support for the Coast Guard aviation community.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Ben, we're glad to have you with us. Jean asked the questions, how do the entry requirements to join the Coast Guard compare to requirements of the other military services? Are they more stringent, less stringent? Could just comment on that.
That's an excellent question. I think that's by my friend Jean Bogan. The Coast Guard is probably the most competitive service to get into. We have a Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut, that has about 1,000 cadets. It's very small compared to the other service academies. To get into the Coast Guard Academy, at times, the acceptance rate was like 1 in 20 or 1 in 30. More stringent than the Navy Academy. Both enlisted and officer programs are very, very stringent. They sometimes have long waiting lists. Like when I joined and after I finished college in 1963, I wanted just to go into the reserves for what they call 6x6, 6 months active duty, 6 years reserve, 2-year waiting list. They talked me into going to officer candidate school, which I've never regretted. But no, it's always a very, very demanding. Now, interestingly, not many people know about the Coast Guard. I can honestly say in my 27 years of retirement, I don't know that I've recruited a Coast Guard person. And I've tried, I really have. I don't know why that is, but they have a high demand, I think probably from a lot of the people that live along the shoreline that really see what the Coast Guard does, the benefits they provide.
Mm-hmm. What percentage of Coast Guard members are women?
Good question. I would guess at this point between 18 and 20%, maybe a little bit more than that. We've made efforts in the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has made efforts to increase their minorities and women and throughout the enlisted corps and the officer corps and at the Coast Guard Academy, making great strides in doing that. I was the first academy to graduate women.
Are women also moving up the ranks?
Yes, we have not yet had a 4-star admiral, although one was very close. Years ago, Vivian Cray, I knew Vivian, she was a great aviator. The Secretary of Homeland Security will interview all the 3-star admirals, and we only have maybe 10, 12 for the position for Commandant, which is the 4-star. Now, just recently, we have 2 4-star rank, but there has yet to be a woman to make it to the top.
Good, thank you. Somebody made a comment that they came late, and did you talk about Russell Wachke? Is that how Waesche?
Wachke. No, I didn't. I honestly don't know that much about him. I know he's got a famous name. I believe he's a retired admiral. I think he may have been commandant of the Coast Guard at one time.
Thank you. How many people did you say that were evacuated after 9/11 or at 9/11?
There was 500,000. This because New York Harbor is so vast, and there was so many people on the lower end of Manhattan there that they had to find ways to get off the island. They didn't know what was happening. They knew we were under attack. We didn't know what the extent would be. So the Coast Guard sort of headed up a group of vessels. I don't know this for sure, but I think that they took overall coordination for the evacuation of Lower Manhattan.
When you say they took charge, I know I'm from New Jersey. I worked in New York. Did they actually coordinate even the pleasure boats that came in that helped get people out? I mean, they were in charge of water evacuation?
I believe so, Louise, and I invite anyone in the audience that is of a marine safety background that might know more about this, because it would be our marine safety program that did this.
Great, thank you. How does the U.S. Coast Guard recruit and train personnel? And is there still a Coast Guard reserve?
Yes, good question. We recruit personnel. It's believe it or not, it's very difficult to find Coast Guard recruiters. They're all in major cities. Here I live in Charlottesville, an hour and 15 minutes from Richmond. But if my next door neighbor's son or daughter wanted to join the Coast Guard, I say, well, let me tell you about it. But you'll have to go to Richmond to fill out the applications and be enlisted. But yeah, there's quite a few enlistments done, and officers now. The training, of course, is done at the Reserve Training. It used to be the Reserve Training Center at Yorktown. That's where I went to school, but it's now combined with the Academy up in New London. So you have the Coast Guard Academy and the Reserve portion of the Coast Guard officer training there. We have a large enlisted, what we used to call boot camps are now known as training facilities at Cape May, New Jersey. So you may know about that one, Louise, right at the tip of Cape May.
Yep.
Very large. And then we have training centers throughout the Coast Guard. And for example, I was familiar with the one in Petaluma that trains enlisted technicians, electronic technicians, used to be radiomen too, and other training facilities around the Coast Guard. Elizabeth City has the aviation training for the rescue men. And but most of our pilots, I think all of our pilots, go through basic flight training through the Navy, Pensacola. And then they make the decision whether they want to go fixed wing or helicopters.
Gotcha.
And then we have the Aviation Training Center in Mobile. I was stationed there for 3 years as Public Works. That's the showplace of aviation, although Ben may have other thoughts. But they train the pilots in simulators there. And a very, very intensive training. By the way, the Aviation Training Center in Mobile was a strategic location for all the helicopters that were brought in for rescuing the people and after Hurricane Katrina.
Gotcha. By the way, we have, can you stay about 5 minutes extra? Because we do have a number. You're okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. George Hobart asked a question that makes the comment that his brother was an executive on the MSTS. Wait a minute. Ship during Korea. What connection, if any, does the U.S. Coast Guard have to MSTS?
None really. They come under the Merchant Marine, which is under the Department of Transportation. Of course, the Coast Guard did a lot of rescuing, as I mentioned earlier, during World War II, World War I. The merchant mariners that had to have convoy duty between the East Coast and England. Just a sidebar on that, I took a course on submarines, Navy submarines, taken up there at Encore Learning. And the coast, at the beginning of World War II, the convoys were really in single file. They were like shooting ducks. And then they were losing so many merchant mariners that they had to decide how we're going to protect them, because the Coast Guard could only go out so far to protect them, and then the English could come and protect them on that side. But there was a vast ocean area that they were by themselves. So they started the convoy aspect. So they put them all together in a convoy. And believe it or not, they were actually going to sacrifice the outer ring to save those in the inner ring.
Gotcha. Question here about on the east and west coast, how far north and south does the Coast Guard patrol? And how far out do you go?
Well, we patrol all the way up through the Grand Banks and up through Alaska. I mentioned the Alaska patrols. And down in the Caribbean, we have an air station and ships in Puerto Rico. And that stretches all the way down to what they call OPBAT, which is where our Coast Guard, a lot of our aircraft fly out of our big station outside of Tampa, St. Pete. Also, the air station at Puerto Rico, we acquired from the Air Force, and we have C-130s there. So we cover quite a bit of the domain. And the Pacific, I was stationed in Honolulu for 2 years, my last 2 years in the Coast Guard. We had the entire Pacific Ocean to watch for drug interdiction, alien migrant interdiction, search and rescue. Quite a huge expanse of ocean.
Interesting. Jack Royer makes a comment that he thinks that Healy was part of a famous family, his brother being the head of Georgetown University.
Really?
There was definitely a Father Healy that headed Georgetown, so it might be the same family.
It may have been a family relationship, yeah. Healy, I think, is an Irish name. So it may be somewhere in the history of the Healy family.
Right. What is the mission of the U.S. Coast Guard on Telegraph Road here in Alexandria? Is it a headquarters?
No, that's a good question. It's they've changed the name several times, but it was called, it's for electronics. It was called TISCOM. And we have a lot of electronics training done there. That's where the Coast Guard Honor Guard is located too. They're stationed there. So they participate in a lot of the ceremonies in Washington, D.C., but it's down there on Telegraph Road. It's quite a large facility. It's grown over time.
Your colleague and friend Ben had a comment. The Coast Guard Aviation Association, an ancient order of the pterodactyls.
Pterodactyl, yeah.
Pterodactyl purpose is to preserve Coast Guard and aviation history and also to recognize the performance of active duty Coast Guard aviation personnel. In addition, they conduct annual conventions called a Roost, which is a social fraternal part of it. So,
well, that's good. Thanks for adding that in, Ben, because they do technical training. And so active duty people are allowed to come there. They're usually held at, I guess I could say always held at Coast Guard facilities or near Coast Guard facilities. And so the unit itself takes over the responsibility for the logistics and all that. Ben's wife, Ann, is often helps out with negotiating hotel contracts.
gotcha. Now, a couple of people also raised their hand with questions. David, can we unmute people and then anybody that raised their hand ask a question directly?
Yeah, we can. For some reason, they're not showing on my screen. I apologize if you can.
Oh, I know Steve Spangler had raised his hand. Steve, if you're on, can you ask your question?
We would have to unmute them, but
Yeah, can you unmute?
I'm not seeing that function on my screen for some reason.
To unmute?
Yeah.
Okay, and Madeline also had a question, and there was a third person, but I don't have that on here, so I guess we were not able to address those.
Well, I wonder, David, if can you unmute?
And Kevin.
Can you unmute them all?
Yes, David?
Let me see here. Hold on a second.
You're asking to unmute the entire audience?
Right.
Yes, and asking specific people to ask their questions, Chris.
Dave would be in charge of the security aspects.
Let's see here.
You mean he could go to jail?
No, we could get Zoom bombed. Lots of things could happen.
Yeah, I'm actually not even seeing that global unmute. I'm sure it's there, but so normally we're able to get to people. Well, let's see. I Steve, no, but I'm not really for some reason able to.
Okay, we'll have to apologize that
That was Stephen Spangler.
Stephen Spangler, Madeline, Kevin also has a hand up, but we don't seem to be able to access the unmute.
I knew Stephen when I was up at ALRI, and his wife is Barbara. He was the technical support for ALRI.
Oh, I did. Okay, Kevin, I think.
Yes, Kevin.
Okay. Yeah, Kevin, you can unmute yourself now and speak if you want.
I tried to do that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you now. Yep, it works. Okay.
Really briefly, I just wanted to thank you for doing this. I'm an Arlington native, and I was at Coast Guard Station Satahip in Thailand from 71 to 72. And what you've presented has meant a lot to me, and I thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your service. I know that that was part of Operation establishing the Loran stations in Southeast Asia. Very,
Yeah.
very important function, especially providing what we call Loran support, long-range aids to navigation to aircraft, particularly Air Force, but also commercial pilots.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we were stationed. Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we were stationed across 5 miles of water from Utapao Air Force Base, huge Air Force base, with B-52s taking off, flying on our tower. And oh, it was a frightening thing to see these big birds barely getting off the ground and out of the water. Never forget it. Anyway, thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I had the fortunate I only had 2 years of sea duty in 30. I wanted more, but no, they wanted civil engineers ashore. But I had the 2 years I was on a huge ship out of Honolulu. We got out throughout the Pacific supporting the Loran stations like you were at. And there was quite a mission for all those Loran stations, Loran A and Loran C. They had, of course, their own people unaccompanied. 1 year, I think, or maybe even 13 months duty. And that was very, very important. The whole Loran program was set up during World War II under a high secret operation.
Right. Yeah, our station had Loran A and Loran C. And well, it was fascinating and it was beautiful and wonderful, and I couldn't wait to get home.
Well, when I was out in Hawaii, we were closing down the Loran stations. The Loran A, as I recall, all went to the Philippine government, and the Loran C, what was left, because we demolished a lot of them, went to Japan.
Thank you, sir.
Well, Jim, I would like to thank you and Kevin and all the Coast Guard folks that are on this presentation today. But Jim, certainly for your presentation. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in what you've done and appreciation for your role in our national security and in saving lives on the sea. So thank you very, very much. This has just been great.
Louise, it's been indeed a pleasure for me to present this, and I'm glad that people have very interesting questions, which means they didn't fall asleep. They actually paid attention.
Well, they stayed with you right till the end, and that's always a mark of, if you have a party, if everybody stays till the end, that's a good sign. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And everybody, don't forget on March 8th, one hell of a ride. This has been one hell of a ride. So one hell of a ride, the story of Miriam Sarachek, and on the 22nd, the story about rebuilding Puerto Rico's grid. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.